The following is a hockey podcast out of Vancouver and Surrey, British Columbia. It'll only consist of a lot of puck talk and even more BS, or in actual words, banter and satire. Enjoy, and as always, go Canucks go.
Are the Vancouver Canucks really going to enter next season with this defense? Really? I'm not convinced. And what I'm also not convinced of is the Montreal Canadiens hanging on to all those young defensemen. Maybe there's a match between the Canucks and the Canadiens. Let's get into it here on Locked On Canucks.
You're Locked On Canucks, your daily podcast on the Vancouver Canucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Locked On Canucks. My name is Trevor Beggs, the co-host of Locked On Canucks and also a Canucks writer since 2013, currently with Daily Hive Vancouver. Before we dive into today's episode, we got to thank you. I'm talking to you for tuning into Locked On Canucks. You know why? Because it is your Canucks every damn day, even in the middle of July when nothing's going on and Patrik Allvin's hanging out by a Swedish lake in his Speedo. Okay, we still got you covered. All right. And, we're part of that Locked On Podcast Network. And for this show, if you haven't done so already, what are you waiting for? Make sure you go subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. I also got to let you know today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Are you hiring? Are you looking for work? Come on, make sure you go use Indeed, okay? And if you're hiring, you can start hiring now with the $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. The Vancouver Canucks, do they need to hire another scout on defense? You know what? The pro scouting has improved a lot since the Jim Benning days. But on today's episode of Locked On Canucks, I want to pose this. Could the Vancouver Canucks and the Montreal Canadiens swing a deal? And the reason I bring this up is twofold. I think you look at the Canucks defense first and foremost, and I'm just not convinced that they're done upgrading the defense. They got a little bit of cap room to work with still. And when you look at Montreal, they got a surplus of young defensemen. How good are these defensemen? And could any of them be potential fits for the Vancouver Canucks? Let's get into some of the names that could potentially be shipped out of Montreal on this episode of Locked On Canucks. We'll touch on best fits for Vancouver, the pros and cons of some of these young defensemen in Montreal. And again, hey, we've seen it in this city. This is the environment where you want young defensemen. This is the team, this is the coaching staff that resurrected Tyler Myers' career, that turned former Canadiens prospect Noah Juulsen from a guy who looked like he was lost at the NHL level to a really respectable guy who can play minutes on an NHL team. So there's some parallels there to get into. I also want to end off the episode talking about the best trades between Montreal and Vancouver. Let's just say this. This is not these aren't two franchises that have traded together very often. We obviously saw one trade last season with Tanner Pierce and Casey Smith. But in general, the Canucks and Canadiens don't trade often. But that might change in the days, weeks, months to come. Who knows? Who knows? Okay. But again, the Montreal Canadiens, so really with their situation right now, it is interesting because, they've acquired quite a few young defensemen. And you look at this team right now, and they really have two veterans. It's Mike Matheson and this Dave Savard. And the rest of it is kind of young guys trying to figure things out in the NHL. So I'm going to go through the depth chart quickly here for the Montreal Canadiens. And this is courtesy of Habs Eyes on the Prize, okay? My former co-workers over at SB Nation before those bastards. They pulled the rug on us. Shout out to Nux Bisconic. Shout out to Habs Eyes on the Prize. Now, the Montreal Canadiens do have more depth on the left side, okay? So after Mike Matheson, they have Caden Gooley. They have Jordan Harris. They have Arbor Wi-Fi / Arbor Jack-Eye. And they also have Jaden Struble as well. So that's five guys on their left side, all of whom played quite a few NHL games last season. Arbor Jack-Eye is the guy who I think a lot of fans probably know the most. The guy came out of nowhere 2 seasons ago and was throwing down with some of the best fighters in the game, putting up some goals, likes to crunch bodies. I think it goes without saying that if the Canucks have a preferred target, I wouldn't be surprised if he's their guy. But, in the past, he's been rumored to be on the trade market, but Montreal is asking a pretty high price for him because of, again, that unicorn-like mentality that he brings, right? There's not a lot of guys who are 6'5", 230 like Arbor Jack-Eye who can skate pretty well and chuck the body around. And hey, there's a thirst in this market to replace the 6'6", 250 hole left by Nikita Zadorov. And yeah, I know they got Forbert and I know they got Desharnais, but I do believe this organization would like to take another swing on a young prospect or not even a prospect, a young defender who could make an impact. But there you go. There's 5 names I listed on the left side. I'm going to put Caden Gooley probably up running to be traded, mainly because he was a steady top 4 defenseman for Montreal last season. The guy, he averaged the most even strength ice time among Montreal defensemen, more than Mike Matheson and more than Dave Savard. So I think Caden Gooley is, probably going to cost too much in terms of guys that the Canucks might acquire. But the other 3 guys there, Arber Xhekaj, Jordan Harris, and Jaden Struble, those are guys who, again, are all 5 of them going to make the NHL team next season. These are just left side guys. Let's take a look at the right side guys as well. I mentioned Dave Savard. You also have Justin Barron and Logan Mailloux. He was really good in the AHL last season. Got a very small cup of coffee, played 1 NHL game last year. Actually recorded his first NHL point in that game. 6'3", big, mean guy. For a couple of reasons, I'm not going to have him on this potential acquisition list for the Vancouver Canucks because I think the Montreal Canadiens value him quite highly, right? I think, some of the rumblings coming out of Montreal is that this guy, could be playing ahead of Justin Barron in terms of right defense next season. Okay, so I've listed 8 guys in total, and that's not to even mention some of the top prospects in Montreal who could play NHL games next season. One of them is Lane Hutson, Tom Willander's partner for part of the season, or at least teammate at Boston University. He is now signed his pro contract. Could he play NHL games for this team? That wouldn't surprise me. He got a cup of coffee last season. And of course, you have David Reinbacher, the pride of Austria, who was drafted 5th overall back in 2022. So there's 10 defensemen in Montreal right now who could all realistically be vying for roster spots next season, okay? And again, I think there's probably 4 guys here who could potentially be traded. And it is Arber Xhekaj, Jordan Harris, Jaden Struble, and Justin Barron on the right side. Now, I'm going to touch on the sexiest name, and that's Arber Xhekaj, because I do think that the Canucks would be interested in acquiring this guy just based on who they chased in free agency, right? Derek Forbort signed to a 1-year, $1.5 million deal. He's not a long-term solution. He's a guy who can, eat up minutes on the bottom pairing. He can kill penalties, and David Desharnais in a similar mold as well, except obviously a bit younger. And of course, we mentioned on the show before, everydayers know, maybe even occasional listeners know, but Kyle Bowen, my co-host, who's not here, by the way. Another bad weekend with the chocolate Bacardi for Kyle. But he did an episode right after free agency talking about how Vincent Desharnais, the goal for him is to be better than Darnell Nurse. And you heard Allvin talk about it, right? He likes the project. He likes the idea of having a big physical defenseman with some potential who they can mold moving forward. Now, the one thing to know with Arber Xhekaj is, the guy, he had some injuries last season, right? It was surgery which ended his season, but he only played 44 games last season overall. He's actually still unsigned at this point. So I'm not going to go offer sheet territory, but this is a guy who, again, is still unsigned. And, I'm not quite sure. Montreal's got the cap space to do it. So, it's interesting to see what's going on there with Arber Xhekaj. Justin Barron also is a guy who is unsigned right now. So, again, there's a couple defensemen in Montreal who maybe these guys aren't the first choice to be making the team next season because of the guys I mentioned. Could Arber Xhekaj lose a spot because, yeah, sure, he's big and physical, but, a guy like Jordan Harris was more reliable overall. He was more reliable on the penalty kill. So I think Jordan Harris is slotting ahead of the depth chart in Arber Xhekaj. And that's what our friends at Habs Eyes on the Project kind of alluding to as well. And then on the right side, Justin Barron. He's going to be competing against, again, David Reinbacher, Logan Mailloux for a spot on the left side. How much do they pay that guy? So decisions to make in Montreal. But I do think Arber Xhekaj, again, would be probably the number 1 target for the Vancouver Canucks. But is he the most likely guy to come to the Vancouver Canucks? I'm not so sure about that. So let me break down some of the other names on this list on the other side. I'll get a bit more into Justin Barron. I'll get a bit more into Jordan Harris and Jaden Struble as well. The Strubelian one, if you will. Shout out to Don Taylor, the GOAT. You're listening to Locked On Canucks, your Canucks every day. On the other side, again, I'll get into those names. I'll also rank who's most to least likely to come to Vancouver out of those 4 names and what a potential package could look like. All that and more coming up on the other side. Before that, we got to show to our friends over at Indeed. All right, I know some of you might want to slack off during the summertime, okay? Who needs a job? The sun's shining, the beach is there. But you know what? If you decide to, get back in the job market, or if you're an employer who wants to, take off that Speedo and slap the suit back on and do some hiring, make sure that you use Indeed. Because if you need to hire, you need Indeed. They are your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data. And they got a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work and use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't help you just hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality of matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. So listeners of the show, guess what? You will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this very podcast. You heard it. It's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. You sure do, baby. Let's go. All right. You're back here on Locked On Canucks. Again, my name, Trevor Beggs, without my co-host, Kyle Bowen, because you know what? This guy, Kyle Bowen, he does 86% of the work on Locked On Canucks. So once in a while, I got to step up on my own and do some solo episodes, man. Okay? And here I am talking about defenseman of Montreal. Come on, Patrik Allvin. I know you've worked hard. One of the GMs of the year. I guess runner-up GM of the year. But, I do think there's a world in which Patrik Allvin could swing a trade with the Montreal Canadiens here. And we talked about Arber Xhekaj being, a nice fit on defense for the Vancouver Canucks. And SK93, he gets it, man. A Xhekaj-Desharnais pairing would be menacing, okay? You want to talk about an identity for your Vancouver Canucks? A Xhekaj-Desharnais pairing, to me, that's scarier than just having Nikita Zadorov on your team. Those are two of the most mean and physical guys in the NHL. Now, I think for acquiring Xhekaj, I think the conversation probably starts at a 3rd-round pick, which I think a lot of Canuck fans would do that in a heartbeat, right? You think Nikita Zadorov, again, an older player on an expiring contract, but a cap at around 3.75. It cost the Canucks a 3rd and a 5th rounder to get him. I think it's going to cost, I think in the ballpark, that's what Xhekaj will cost. I think it might even cost more. Not by much, though, because here's the trade-off, right? I mean, Zadorov, much more experience. Think you know what you're getting. Xhekaj, you're paying a bit more for the potential, right? But I do think Xhekaj is one of those guys who probably tops out as a bottom-pairing defenseman. But, when you got Quinn Hughes and Phil Pronik on your team and a Carson Soucy can, if he can hit and stick as a top 4 guy, then really all you need is a bottom-pairing guy to solidify things. And Arber Xhekaj, again, he's got some flash to his game in a way that's mainly physical, right? Not a guy who's often killed penalties in Montreal. Unlike another guy on this list who doesn't really fit the mold of what the Canucks are looking for. And I'll actually bring these guys up together because I think there's similar skill sets, but they play on the different sides. Okay, and that's Jordan Harris, left shot D for the Montreal Canadiens, and Justin Barron, a right shot D. So Jordan Harris, again, he was trusted a lot for the Canadiens last season. Averaged more ice time than Arber Xhekaj when he was in the lineup. Played a lot of penalty kill time for the Montreal Canadiens. In terms of the fancy stats, in terms of the numbers, look, the numbers weren't really kind to many Montreal Canadiens defensemen last season, but they were kind to Jordan Harris. He was the only Montreal Canadiens defenseman last season who had an expected goals of above. That's actually Arber Xhekaj. Arber Xhekaj, the only Canadiens defenseman with expected goals above 50% at 50.6%. But Jordan Harris coming in second with an expected goals just below 50%. And again, I think Jordan Harris got a bit more runway last season in terms of the NHL. He's got a little bit more of, I want to call Troy Stetcher in this game. I know it's probably be a lazy comparison for a guy who's a bit smaller. I mean, he's 5'11", 190. He's not small. But, he's just one of those guys who moves well, not the most amazing skater, doesn't have the best shot, but just a smart player defensively. And again, came from that Northeastern University program where a lot of Canucks prospect developed over the years, including, guys that are no longer with this team, like Aiden McDonough and Adam Gaudette, among others. But again, Jordan Harris wouldn't cost a lot to get, I don't think. He's signed right now for one more season at $1.4 million. To me, an intriguing depth option, especially when you already have some size in your back end with Juleson, Forbort, and Desharnais. I think Harris could be a guy who could challenge for some bottom pairing minutes next season. Now, with Justin Barron, again, a bit more offensive flair to his game. He's a little taller than Jordan Harris and could get squeezed on the right side. And look, this is already a guy in Justin Barron who was considered a top prospect and was already traded once in his NHL career. Now, he was a Colorado Avalanche prospect who was traded along with a round 2 pick for Arturi Lehkonen. Okay, so cost the Colorado Avalanche. Basically, he was a first-round pick in that 2020 draft as well. So first and a second for Arturi Lehkonen. That's worked out pretty well for Colorado. Now, one of the interesting things with Justin Barron is that, in the NHL last season, the guy had 7 goals, 13 points in 48 games. So that's not a bad little streak for him, right? He's kind of pushing that 12 goals, 25 points. Not a bad pace for a bottom pairing demon. Interestingly enough, at the AHL level, his production wasn't as good. But look, I think Jordan Harris and Justin Barron, you got a couple projects on your hands, right? Justin Barron, a little younger at 22 years old. Jordan Harris at 24 years old. A bit more upside with Justin Barron, and he plays that premium position at right shot D. But again, I don't think either of those guys are really what the Canucks want in terms of a bottom pairing defenseman, although there's a strong argument that they need better puck moving, right? And of the 4 guys I listed, Jordan Harris, Justin Barron, better puck movers, less physical. Arbor Xhekaj and the 4th guy I have not mentioned, Jaden Struble, both have more physicality to their games. And Jaden Struble, I think, is a guy that not many fans know about, but he was pretty good last season for the Montreal Canadiens in limited minutes. So he ended up getting into 56 games for Montreal, was throwing the body around, had a kind of pedestrian, 3 goals, 10 points in 56 games, 7 points in 13 AHL games. Jaden Struble, also 22 years old, I should say. I honestly think he's the least sexy name on this list, but I would say that he's maybe the most likely player the Canucks acquire, mainly because I think he'll actually cost the least, right? He doesn't quite have the name cachet that Arbor Xhekaj has. He doesn't have the kind of the offensive flair to an extent that Justin Barron or Jordan Harris have. But he's a physical guy. Just got his cup of coffee in the NHL last season. And again, I think he's hard pressed on that left side with the guys I mentioned ahead of him, right? The Mike Matheson, the Caden Gooley. If you count Xhekaj and Harris, who are both ahead of him on the depth chart. Even Lane Hudson. I mean, look, the Montreal Canadiens, according to Habs odds on the prize, Jaden Struble is 6 on the Montreal Canadiens organizational depth chart. 6. So he's a second pairing AHL defenseman, according to the Habs eyes on the prize. So that's a guy who I think is going to be hard pressed to make the Canadiens team next season, who does require waivers, to my knowledge. And again, I think the Canadiens could get some assets for him. So that's maybe a guy I see a similar trade to what they did with Jonathan Kovacevic, maybe a 4th round pick for Jaden Struble. So I'm going to rank it like this. I think Jaden Struble, Arbor Xhekaj, then Justin Barron, and then Jordan Harris. That's probably the order in terms of what the Canucks would target most least. I think Justin Barron over Jordan Harris just because of, that need on the right side a bit more than they do on the left side, especially because, hey, Tyler Myers is still the second pairing right shot defenseman on this team. Let's wrap up the show on the other side. Actually, okay, I'll mention one more thing. There's one comment I wanted to get to. I'll get to a couple other comments on the other side. And this comment comes from SK93. Would you trade Podkolzin for Xhekaj 1-for-1? Now, I think that's certainly a conversation. I don't want to say, that's a tough one, man. I'm leaning towards no, because I think with Podkolzin's draft profile, I still think that you could probably get more value for Podkolzin. That being said, I do think at this point, if Podkolzin tops out at being a third liner, you're probably happy. So do you want a third, how valuable is a third line player versus a physical bottom pairing defenseman? I actually think that a Podkolzin for Xhekaj trade could be somewhat close to fair value. I think if the Canucks made that trade, fans in this market would widely applaud it. I think that would be a trade that would be widely accepted in this market because, again, this city still has a hard-on for Nikita Zadorov, and Arbor Xhekaj would do a lot in terms of replacing that. I think he'd be missed in Montreal. I could see Jaden Struble getting more minutes if they trade Arbor Xhekaj because you still want some physicality on your back end. But again, part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation is because Montreal has this dearth of young defensemen. Not all of them are going to play, and none of them are going to really cost a lot, right? As sexy as Arbor Xhekaj might be, again, I think a Podkolzin or a third-round pick is probably what you would get or have to give up at a trade for Xhekaj. And some of the other guys I mentioned too, they have high draft profiles, but again, when you got guys facing waiver crunches and you might lose them on the waiver wire for nothing, something that Montreal has to consider. And I think the Canucks found that themselves in that spot a couple seasons back with some of the guys that didn't work out as much, like the Troy Stetchers and the Ben Huddens. So I know we could be talking about a bunch of Ben Huddens and Troy Stetchers here, but let's pretend that these guys could maybe be a little bit something more. And hey, those guys have both carved out some NHL careers. They're both still sticking around in the dance past the age of 30, if I'm not mistaken. All right. Troy Stetcher in Edmonton, Ben Hudden with the Vegas Golden Knights. Let me know in the comments which of these young defensemen you'd be most interested in acquiring. I imagine it's Xhekaj for most of you, but I do see some love for other guys here. I'll get to a couple comments on the other side. One of the other things I do want to do to wrap up the show here is talk about trades between Montreal and Vancouver, because it's list season, baby. And I've gone through every single trade between the Montreal Canadiens and the Vancouver Canucks. Let's get to on the other side. Rank them in the middle of summer here on Locked On Canucks. Bum, 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 bum. All right. You're back on Locked On Canucks. Your Canucks every day. Again, I'm Trevor Beggs, not joined by my co-host today, Kyle Bowen, who I heard he went on a marathon of sorts last night, right? I heard he went on a sex marathon, basically. Yeah, he did it, man. He did that all-night marathon, buddy. I'm proud of you, man. And that's why we're eventually going to be sponsored by Cialis or Viagra here on Locked On Canucks. Kyle Bowen, kudos to you and your big old. What a guy, man. So proud of Kyle, man. Round of applause. Round of applause for Kyle Bowen, man. Unbelievable stuff. Now, again, he's maybe not as talented as some of the defensemen I mentioned there on the Montreal Canadiens, but people are excited about Arbor Xhekaj, man. So Bob Bluger, Teddy Bluger's cousin, says he's getting all jacked up on Xhekaj. Stéphane Dubois, maybe a Canadiens fan here, joining the chat, says he's not going anywhere. Arbor, he's staying in Montreal. Yeah, I mean, like, he's necessarily not an immovable guy, in my opinion. He's not a core member of the Montreal Canadiens, so I think anything is possible. I think the Canadiens would prefer to trade probably the three other guys I've mentioned, right? Between Justin Barron, Jordan Harris, and Jaden Struble. I think those guys are more likely to be moved than Arbor Xhekaj. And there's a reason why Arbor Xhekaj is probably the most desirable player among those four for your Vancouver Canucks. I think a lot of other teams probably feel the same way, right? Physicality is still something that NHL teams need, okay? Now, one thing I wanted to do is point out that the Canucks and Canadiens over the years have not made a lot of trades, okay? So I'm going to rank some of the biggest trades between these two teams ever. I will say that the Canucks and Canadiens have traded 13 times since the Canucks entered the NHL. Oddly enough, 4 of those trades came within the Canucks' first year of existence. They traded with the Canadiens in November of 1970, May of 1971, June of 1971, and September of 1971. 2 of those trades were just they traded 2 players for cash. 2 players I've never heard of, and that's saying something because I'm a bit of a hockey nerd. But between these teams, I'm going to rank the biggest, in my mind, the biggest 3 trades between these teams. And from there, I think it's kind of slim pickings. But number 3, I'm going to go the Canucks trade Yasin Cullimore for Donald Brashear back in November of 1996. And I know Donald Brashear was not a world beater, but he was a beloved figure in this market for quite some time. Donald Brashear, watching him fight is among some of my first Canuck memories. And I'm either dating myself, either old or young here, probably more on the young side. Let's be real. Sure, getting it done for Vancouver Canucks for a long time, spending 6 seasons here with the city. The second biggest trade between these two teams ever, in my opinion, was back in January of 1991, where the Canucks trade a 4th-round pick for Gerald Diduck. Okay, speaking of big tough guys, Gerald Diduck, maybe not quite as big and tough as here, but still a guy who was part of a team in '94 that went to the Stanley Cup Finals. All right, and then finally, the biggest trade, and I think this is an easy one between the Canucks and the Canadiens, was back in 1990, March 6th of 1990, when the Vancouver Canucks and GM Pat Quinn traded a 2nd-round pick for Jyrki Lumme, the best Finnish player in Canucks history. Let's go, baby. Jyrki Lumme, obviously one of the best defensemen the city's ever seen. You could argue maybe he was the best offensive defenseman ever in this market until Quinn Hughes came along, and still a guy who's active in this community to this day. So shout out to Jyrki Lumme, who actually he turns 58 tomorrow, buddy. So happy early birthday to Jyrki Lumme. If you listen to the show, man, a fellow Cancer here. Got to shout out the buds, okay? Some of the only other trades between these two teams in recent memory, really, since they've only traded 3 times since the lockout in 04-05. That was back in 2014 when the Canucks traded Rafael Diaz for Dale Weiss. Of course, they then flipped Diaz like 2 months later for a 5th-round pick that ended up being Adam Gaudette for a little trade tree there. There was the Cassian and a 5th-round pick for Brandon Prust trade. Ugh. And, of course, there was the Tanner Pearson, Casey DeSmith trade from September. That's the only 3 trades that these two teams have made in the last 20 years. So I'm just saying, I think these two teams might be poised to make a deal here, okay? Because they've done it recently. I think they could do it again. Let's wrap up the show with a couple of comments here on Locked On Canucks. Let's shout out this comment from Steve, okay? Steve saying Noah Juulsen is underrated. Yes, he stepped up to make big hits with Burn the team, but that's also on the forwards for not backing him up. Look, on a number of levels, Noah Juulsen took so many steps forward last season. And, this comparison might sound weird because I had this guy in my mind for earlier in the episode, but I see him as almost a more physical Ben Hutton. Like Ben Hutton would make those mistakes that when he made them, they were glaring. Now, Ben Hutton was mainly just turning the puck over and making bad reads. Noah Juulsen, as to what Steve's alluding to, he'll step up and make that big hit and he gets burned on it. Now, I will say that I think it's every typical hockey team. The forwards are always blaming the defense are always blaming the forwards, right? But in the 2 instances I can think of where Noah Juulsen stepped up to make that hit, and one was against the Oilers in Game 3, I believe, or Game 4, actually, after Soucy got suspended. And then in the regular season when he stepped up on Mark Scheifele. In both of those moments, he's stepping up where he shouldn't step up because the other team's rushing back the other way. He doesn't have coverage. Like, even if Juulsen steps up, the forwards are coming back trying to support him, but they don't have the time to catch up. So, I think both of those moments, I'd love to be a fly on the wall to hear what Adam Foote says, Noah Juulsen, in those moments, because you want the guy to be physical, but you also got to pick your spots too. And I think Noah Juulsen, was a big learning curve last season. I think he's still learning to pick his spots. And I'm curious about how many NHL games Noah Juulsen is going to get next season. I think a lot of that's going to depend on the performance of Myers and the performance of Desharnais. Because again, I think more about this Tyler Myers in the second pairing, and I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. But I do think, much like last season, the Canucks, as they're currently constructed, are going to roll at the top 2 and the bottom 4, which is basically what they did last season. You're going to see Hughes and Hronek eating up 23, 24 minutes a game. And the other guys, I think the other 2 pairings might be somewhat even, with the Soucy pairing maybe getting a bit more than the bottom pairing. Last comment here. I'm going to go back to Bob Bluger because, man, oh man, this is a trip down memory lane. You should, again, you listen to Locked On Canucks, your Canucks every day. Thanks for making this your first listen of the day. If you joined us early here, go make your second listen to Locked On NHL. And if you're on YouTube, make sure you go look at the Rick Rippon versus Hal Gill fight. I think Bob Bluger says it. One of the best moments in Canucks history. Shout out to Rick Rippon, man, oh man. What an absolute beauty. And hey, as I'm saying that, like, it looks like there's 37 of you watching live here. So shout out to the number 37, Rick Rippon. Will never be forgotten. I hope you don't forget about us here. Again, how could you forget about us? Because we're here every damn day on Locked On Canucks. Again, my name's Trevor Beggs, and I gotta give a shout out. Okay, a couple shout outs, especially to the everydayers, but also the occasional listeners, the first time listeners, the new subscribers, and those of you who joined us on the live show on YouTube. Whenever you're listening, wherever you're listening, we appreciate the hell out of you for tuning in to Locked On Canucks. It might be the dog days of summer, but we got the ideas brewing, baby. Again, when Kyle gets back from his wet and sticky marathon, I will be back with more episodes this week, every damn day. We want to take a look at Danton Heinen and Kiefer Sherwood. How do those two guys compare, and who might make the bigger impact for your Vancouver Canucks next season? We also want to touch on a couple names still floating out there, and if they could be fits for your Vancouver Canucks. And we'll also get into a little masturbation as well, and look at some projected lines for next season. We did this last summer, what we think's going to happen and what we'd like to see happen. Again, those are usually two different things. All that's coming up and more. So make sure that you're subscribed, give it a like. It helps us out a lot. It helps us, helps me feed my family. And one day Kyle and I will go on that double date as well. Again, appreciate you for tuning in to this episode of Locked On Canucks. But for now, I'm Trevor Beggs signing out. See you later, mother.
You're Locked On Canucks, your daily podcast on the Vancouver Canucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.